Hey guys, welcome to Apologetics 101. My name is Grant, and today we will be talking about the historical evidence for the resurrection of Jesus Christ and why, when the stone was removed from his tomb, he invented rock and roll. They're getting worse. Okay, guys, bad jokes aside, today we are going to be departing from the formula of our last several videos, in which we highlighted what are called syllogistic or formal arguments. And in those videos, we were talking about not a particular version of God, but sort of God in general, why it's more reasonable to believe that there is a God rather than no God at all. But today we're going to get down to brass tacks, and we're going to make the case that because of the evidence for the resurrection of Jesus, that we should take what he said seriously. And what he said was that he himself was God. Now, the question is, why do we go from sort of a general existence of God, existence of any God argument straight to Jesus? Shouldn't we try to talk through the creation narrative or prove the worldwide flood occurred to prove the God of the Bible? And the answer is that for Christians, it is Jesus that is the foundation of our faith, that his death, burial, and resurrection is the reason we take the rest of the Bible seriously. In other words, most of us get to the Bible through Jesus, not to Jesus through the Bible. We as Christians believe that it is Jesus, his ministry, his death, burial, and resurrection that makes the rest of Scripture make sense for us. So let's talk about the historical evidence for the resurrection of Jesus. Now, you'll often hear atheists or people who don't believe in the resurrection say that there is no evidence for the resurrection. Now, what they really mean is that the primary evidence for the resurrection comes from the Bible, and that the Bible doesn't count because it's the Bible, right? I mean, the Bible is just another unverifiable holy book like the Quran or Joseph Smith's Golden Tablets. Or is it? This is a point that I think we as Christians need to shift our mindset about what the Bible really is. The Bible is not a book. It's a library. It's a collection of independently written books from multiple perspectives. This is something that every real scholar agrees on. No one seriously suggests that a single individual or even a group of individuals sat down and just wrote the Bible, or even just the New Testament. So this means that it's not an option to honestly just dismiss the Bible. You have to tackle the books independently. So you can't just say, well, the Bible is untrustworthy. You have to explain why Matthew shouldn't be trusted or isn't a good source of history, and then why Mark is unverifiable, or why Luke shouldn't be trusted, or so on and so forth. So when someone says that there's no evidence for the resurrection, they would have to tackle each gospel independently and prove its untrustworthiness. The next assumption that people often make to discredit the idea of the resurrection is the idea that the disciples would have been inclined to fabricate the resurrection narrative. This could not have been further from the truth. The disciples' belief in the resurrection made them pariahs in their own community and eventually led them to give up their lives for this belief. Many people say in opposition to this point that there are death cults that spring up from time to time. It's unfortunate, but people will give their lives or even commit suicide for something that they believe in, even if that thing is false. But the difference is, the disciples weren't simply giving up their lives for sort of an esoteric belief or just an out there belief. They were giving up their lives for something they claimed to have seen with their own eyes. That's very different from being convinced of a belief more largely. So if you were to say that you saw your grandmother today, right? You know, whether she has passed or she's still alive, and you were to say you saw your grandmother today, and then I were to tell you that if you continued to claim that you saw your grandmother, that I would either burn you alive or boil you in oil, you would probably either, one, lie and say that you actually didn't think you saw your grandmother, or number two, you would start to actually question your own belief and think, well, maybe I saw someone else. So the disciples were so convinced that they saw Jesus alive after he had been crucified that they endured excruciating deaths to maintain their claim. Bart Ehrman, even an atheistic New Testament scholar, says this: "What is certain is that the earliest followers of Jesus believed that Jesus had come back to life in the body, and that this was a body that had real bodily characteristics. It could be seen and touched and had a voice that could be heard. So the first line of evidence is the attestation of the Gospels, independently written using independent eyewitness testimonies. The second line of evidence is that you have a group of disciples and even a larger community who were so convinced that they physically saw Jesus after his death on the cross that they themselves endured excruciating deaths. The third line of evidence is the fact that all the Gospels were written within living memory of the happenings they report and use specific names and eyewitnesses that could be interviewed by readers of the Gospel. So it used to be often proposed that the Gospels were written 100, 200 years after the happenings that they report. But in the past century, that has been all but abandoned by most scholars in favor of much earlier dates. Many scholars have noted that the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, which would have been the most catastrophic happening in the early Christian period, was never mentioned in any of the Gospels, meaning that at the very least their sources were probably before 70 AD. In any case, even a relatively late dating of the Gospels put them within living memory of the communities that are mentioned within them. Now think about this, okay? So the first century Christian/Jewish world was a tight-knit place. People knew nearly everyone in their community. If a book began to circulate that mentions a specific name as being privy to the goings-on of Jesus, or even being miraculously affected, people are going to start asking those specific people as to whether or not those stories about them are true. Names like these are all over the Gospels. So again, you have at least 3 lines of evidence for the resurrection. 1, the Gospel's independent attestation to the resurrection. 2, the disciples' willingness to be subjected to excruciating torture and death to maintain their claim that they had seen Jesus alive after his death on the cross. And 3, the fact that the Gospels were written within living memory of and about individuals and communities which could be independently sought out for verification. Here are a few notes on some common arguments against these facts. Some people posit group hallucination to account for scenes like the Ascension. The problem is that there is actually not one documented case of group hallucination. There are anecdotal stories of people and groups of people seeing things that we seem to not be able to attribute to anything else other than group hallucination, but there is no scientifically documented cases of group hallucination. So if you want to be on the side of science and evidence and reason, I probably would not posit the group hallucination theory. Secondly, group hallucination wouldn't account for even half of the appearances of Jesus. And so you would have to posit a host of different mental issues going on to account for all of the interactions between the disciples and other groups and the interactions that they had with Jesus. And there's not one plausible cause for all of them. So finally, how do we get from where we were with a reasonable belief in some kind of God to the God of the Bible? Well, as I heard a pastor say once, and this may be oversimplified, but it seems to make sense to me, that if a guy can predict his death, burial, and resurrection, and then actually pull it off, let's just go with whatever he said. So there's a lot more information that you could dig into on this, but I want to keep these videos short. So I'll link some other videos that you can watch in the description to go further into this subject. But for now, like, share, subscribe, and we will see you next time.